Hi, welcome to our podcast. Today we're going to be talking about the Rwandan genocide and some frequently asked questions pertaining to it.
Okay, so first we'll be talking about the historical and political context surrounding the genocide. There were two genocides before the Rwandan genocide in this country, and it all began because Belgium granted independence to Rwanda, and this caused hatred between the Hutus and the Tutsis because the Hutus were viewed as a lower class. Next, we'll be talking about the level of awareness that the general public had regionally, nationally, internationally, and how people intervened. So Belgium was one of the first contributors to the United Nations assistance mission for Rwanda. Although it was not very successful, it did save some people. And secondly, Operation Turquoise was initiated by the French to come into Rwanda to set up camps to help Tutsi survivors, and this was more successful than the first operation.
Next, let's talk about what exactly happened. What happened to the perpetrators and the victims during the genocide? The perpetrators targeted their victims because they knew who the Tutsis were. They were neighbors with them before the genocide broke out. They were able to identify them, and they went off in big groups and just slaughtered them in the dozens, even hundreds a day. The victims suffered from rape and also death by machete. There weren't a lot of other forms of cruelty, but death was the ultimate punisher. The perpetrators tried to justify their actions because they saw it as gaining status for after the genocide, and it was also widely accepted throughout the nation that the Hutus would be killing the Tutsis. So in their eyes, they weren't doing anything wrong. They were just gaining their status and also getting revenge on the Tutsis for the previous genocide in Rwanda.
Okay, next we will talk about the lasting effects on the victims and the perpetrators. So for the victims, it's estimated that about 90% of all of the genocide survivors are still experiencing trauma. At first, many were forced to change jobs and schools because of their unresolved trauma. Many children, especially girls, resulted in promiscuity because they didn't know how to cope with what happened to them, and many others developed bad habits and struggled to socialize with others and more. And others resulted in excessive drinking, showing aggression and irritability directed towards anybody. It doesn't matter who they loved, because they could not cope with what had happened to them. And as for the perpetrators, many of them fled immediately because they knew what they did was wrong and they didn't want to have to face any repercussions.
So another question is if there are any survivors and have they told their stories. So if you go to our website and click on the tab about stories of genocide, you can go through and see many accounts of survivors. The next one is why this was considered a genocide. It's because 1 million people died and it was a specific group that was targeted. Thank you so much for listening to our podcast today. You can find more information on our website.